Well, good morning. Let's get ourselves started here. We have nobody online, so we'll see what happens there. We're talking about chapter 16, baptized into servanthood, ministry and priesthood. And I thought it was interesting. One of the phrases he uses on the chapter heading is God calls every member of the church to a life of Christ-like service. My guess is nobody's going to argue with that statement. Okay. Well, then let's move on and talk about some of the other issues he raises. But before we do that, I kind of need your background on your thoughts on ministry. So I want to know what ministry means to you.
Well, 16 chapter.
What chapter are we on?
Oh, we're on 16. I hope we are. Nobody has any idea what ministry means to you.
Well, I think in general, ministry is spreading the word, and then minister is like a pastor. I don't know.
Okay.
That's my
Ministry is the action, minister is the actor.
Okay. Any other supplements to those ideas? Are you saying yeah, go ahead.
I guess I see two questions there. What does ministry mean to you, and is there a difference between minister and ministry? But I guess I agree with what's been said. Ministry can be pretty broad, or it can be somewhat narrow, but actions that serve others and bring them closer to God.
Okay.
I'm going ministry is the caring, sharing, all those words. Activity, which I like the word activities, but I think it's the physical doing things that the worth of persons, the abolishing poverty. I mean, go through those both statements. They all deal with ministry.
Okay. Okay.
I think we have a lot more modern conceptions about minister and ministry, but we also had to keep in mind that for centuries, a minister was a vocation. It was a person who went into that vocation specifically as their life's work, and ministry was the product of that vocation. Was holding services, being with people in your parish or branch or congregation. And it really hasn't been until probably even the last few decades that we've really tried to expand this concept of ministry to all works that people of humility can do to reach out and be a part of the lives of others in meaningful ways. So there's kind of an older definition, and then there's sort of this transformative definition.
Good. So ministry is not simply the function of clergy.
Not anymore.
Okay, but it used to be?
Clergy are people, again, who embraced a vocation of that type of thing. So I think of like cloisters of nuns who taught schools and ministered to the sick and so on and so forth. And hospitals and healthcare even came under the auspices of the church.
Mm-hmm.
It was the ministers who kind of started those places. Oftentimes the nuns, the brothers that took care of the patients and people who had needs.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, probably is not limited to priests only, but people who were at least vocationally attached to the church.
Yeah, I think Paul said that kind of the crux of this issue, of this lesson, is that we have evolved. Our definition of ministry and minister has evolved. Growing up, the ones who provided ministry were the priesthood. Anybody disagree with that?
Yeah.
Well, they were the ones that officially
Officially.
administrator.
Okay,
It doesn't mean they were the only ones that did it.
okay. Anybody ever take a course called Ministry of the Deacon
Probably.
or Ministry of the Priest?
Right.
Or Ministry of the Elder?
Yeah, to the third one.
That all goes up.
Okay. So we tended to link ministry to a priest's office in the past.
Well, and the definition of ministry is much broader nowadays than it's right. And I don't know when that changed or if there's a Greek equivalent for minister or ministry that has a specific meaning, but we've added a whole lot more things to the pot of what ministry is.
I'm
That's
guessing that the dictionary will say a minister is somebody who does something.
Someone who
And
does
ministry is getting things done.
who has
I can look it up.
Someone,
Well, ministers are also government officials.
Yeah, exactly. Minister of War,
And I
Minister of
think
Peace.
in Great Britain,
Yeah,
they have ministers of different
Yeah.
departments.
Oh, yeah.
somebody who does something or
Minister of
leads.
the Interior.
Leads in getting something done.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well,
What does it say?
yeah, there's two definitions. One is a member of the clergy, especially in Protestant churches. Second is a head of a government department,
Okay.
like Britain's defense minister.
Somebody
Well,
who
those
gets
are-
something done.
Yeah, those are the nouns. Minister could be a verb, attend to the needs of someone, as in her doctor was busy ministering to the injured.
Okay.
Or,
So the origin of the word, which is what I was looking for and didn't know, is a person who's acting under the authority of another person. So I think a minister in the religious sense is acting under God's authority, and what Dennis is talking about, the minister of finance is acting under the authority of the prime minister or the king.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Well, what's your understanding of priesthood? What is that thing?
In our denomination? Doesn't matter.
Does it matter?
Servant, minister?
Okay.
One who has been called to the ministry.
Okay. Called to the ministry, which makes it sound like the ministry is for priesthood.
Is that the same as a Melchizedek or?
It
Oh,
encompasses that.
It's not exclusive.
Okay.
So I don't know how the church sees it right now, but priesthood is a special calling, kind of based on abilities or where God wants you to be, and there's the Aaronic and the Melchizedek branches and different priesthood offices, but it's kind of the formal leadership of our church, I don't know. I'd have to listen to more historical voices on how it's changed over the years, but
I'm thinking the word affirming. It affirms that I have some duties and I've got some, I don't know what the right word is, authority, that's not maybe the right word, from God to do. I need to do this because if I'm an elder, I have this responsibility, and being that priesthood office, then I'm affirmed to do those things.
I think in community of Christ, authority is a great word, Ron. I think that's exactly the word. I think authority is tied to the concept of priesthood that we've had in this church for a long time.
Okay. I'll be thinking about what authority is vested in each priesthood office, because we'll talk about that a little bit.
Well,
Further on.
apparently, the Graceland University and the Community of Christ Seminary is trying to help us all learn about ministry because they've got 4 online classes listed coming up: Introduction to Pastor Ministry, Ministry of the Disciple, Children and Youth Worker Training, and Christian Ministry Certification Course, Introduction to Christian Theology.
That's interesting, the ministry of the disciple, because I don't think we've had that in the past, have we?
We didn't in terms of, well, there was a general class that we took, something ministry,
There was a,
introduction to
Introduction to
ministry.
ministry is what I was thinking.
Introduction to
Of course,
ministry
I
was
had-
kind of that same.
Oh,
but
okay.
we also, you know, like all the little themes that we go through. I think there was something disciples for a while was a focus.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, growing up, did you think of ministry and priesthood as connected or synonymous?
yes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing a bunch of yeses.
Connected.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can go with connected.
Yeah, I thought of them connected too. Growing up, maybe in my little Flint, Michigan congregation, maybe we had a misconception, but I really thought that ministry was something provided by priesthood, not by members.
Well, we had such a strong, in addition to authority, we had that strong notion of being called, and that the calling had to come through a pastor or a regional administrator or somebody like that. In other denominations, any person, I think, can pretty much make the choice to enroll in seminary
Right.
and become a minister. Again, it's more vocational. And our church did things a little bit differently. I don't know, maybe there's other denominations that follow that besides Latter-day Saintism.
Seems like it's only been like the last 10 or so years that you've really heard an emphasis in the disciple, you know, every person being a disciple and ministering to others.
I think it's been since 1984 when they allowed women into the priesthood, because all of a sudden it was no longer a patriarchy where the men were the priesthood and the women were in the kitchen. The bad part about women being
Well,
in the
somebody's got to
priesthood,
cook. So.
yeah,
Yeah.
men do it well.
He's a good
But, yeah,
I'll
throw
see
him
myself
away.
out.
But you know, the part that I was going to say is that the ministry that wasn't recognized as ministry, what ministry was the women's departments. You know,
Well, and I was thinking that too, because
yeah.
I think a lot of the I don't know, the folk, the common
yeah,
ministry was coming from women in ways. Meals were being brought into the
yeah,
sick, or
the choirs
or
and the
after-
music, and
yeah.
there was so much ministry, but it wasn't. I don't think it was called ministry. It was called.
That's what it was. Trying
That's
to
the
remember.
women's role.
Women's department.
Yeah.
Did we ever
Yeah.
have a role where? But I know a lot of congregations basically had like one guy who was the only priesthood member, because guys were only.
Yeah.
But the women did all the rest of it.
Right.
So they were providing the ministry. They just didn't have that.
So then, after '84, they didn't know what to do because all of a sudden, you know, women couldn't be both priesthood members and part of the women's department because that was so much work. So our women's departments kind of suffered because of it. You know, obviously, men and women both are still doing all of those ministries, but now it gets to be called ministry. You know, there is music ministry and.
But I know, going back and teaching pre-baptismal class, and I did that for, all the way back to April, I think was in one of my classes. That's, it's been a long time since when I started. But members were always considered an important part of, they had a role in the church, and so members were in that. I can't remember if it said it directly, but there was a ministry that was to be offered if you were just a member. And I don't mean just, but
Did we use that language before '84?
I can't. Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about. And I taught my classes probably in the late '80s, early '90s.
Well, I think, for better or for worse, and whether it was intended or not, and I don't think it was intended, the structure of the priesthood, the Aaronic and the Melchizedek, had the appearance of being very hierarchical, because a male at that time, when you were called to another office, you only went in one direction. You weren't an elder, and then the church said, okay, you need to be called to a deacon.
Yeah.
That's your calling. And I think the church sensed that there was a need maybe to de-emphasize that a little bit. That, you know, when those offices were established, they were established to make sure that ministry was taking place in all different areas, not that one was better somehow than the other.
That it's not a corporate ladder.
It's not a corporate ladder, exactly, but people in their minds don't always
Yeah.
remember that, you know, think through that. So I think, you know, the last few decades, we've had this emphasis on the most important calling in the church is the office of member. If you've heard that specific language.
He said it on page 125, there's a paragraph that says that's exactly what he said.
Okay, yeah, so
Priesthood calls
I
come
remember
from
reading.
discovering the Holy Spirit's action in the community. Priesthood is not a higher calling than that of a disciple, but an invitation to embody authentically specific facets of Jesus' mission.
So I think we're kind of getting back to the right way of looking at things, that there are, ministry is lateral, it's not vertical. I mean, there are lots of different ministries that need to be done, and they're all important, and they're all equally important. But I think we, for a while there, because of the emphasis on priesthood, maybe it was off track.
Well,
I've got an interesting anecdote, kind of humorous in a way. The Brush Creek congregation on Warwick, I remember one of the first women to serve communion. In fact, she was one of the first women called to the priesthood. I scooted clear over to the other side of the pew so I could take communion from her. I remember doing that.
That's such a radical.
Good for you.
Well done.
I never knew Jim was such a rebel.
Yeah, always have been a little bit like my dad.
Regarding the calling,
That's a good thing.
I know at least one, and I'm sure that there are plenty of others, but in other denominations, the ministers do feel a calling.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm not sure that we're denying that other ministers and other denominations have a calling.
Yeah.
I think we're simply saying that our process is that there is a call through the leadership in the
Right.
congregation.
In fact, I just was on a retreat with some women, and one of the women told me her son-in-law felt a calling, and they were in a completely different denomination. And I don't know if that came through, you know, I mean, I think he felt it. He felt it all. It was from within.
Well, I wonder.
I think a lot of them feel a calling that decide to go into a seminary for training.
Yep.
You know, it doesn't mean that it was called through their church, but they feel the calling in their heart that that's what they're meant to do.
Exactly. We keep talking about this lateral nature of priesthood, but on the other hand, section 83 is a revelation from Joseph Smith, just to show you how much we have changed, I think. The office of elder and bishop are necessary appendages belonging in the high priesthood. And again, the offices of teachers, deacons, and are necessary appendages belonging to the lesser priesthood, which priesthood was confirmed upon Aaron and his sons. We've gotten away from that higher and lower priesthood. On the flip side of it, I don't know that I've ever heard of somebody being called to the office of deacon who is already an elder. So we try to equalize the service, and I think we recognize that there's difference, and it's not a hierarchical system, but we very seldom put it the other way. Although I know a lot of elders who have done deacon type duties.
That was my thought.
I know a lot of elders who do.
I feel like members of priesthood may do the functions of another office,
Right.
but that's because they're a minister trying to meet the needs of whatever.
Well, and I've also thought in terms of, you know, I do think kind of unconsciously we still have this ladder, so to speak. But I've always thought that there are people who have deacon souls, you know. And I mean, Ron, wasn't your first priesthood deacon? So when you think of Ron and when you think of Kenitha, whose first priesthood office, they're still deacons. It's not like they completely changed when they became elders. You know, there's still that deacon heart in them, is what I say. And I that's how I am with the office of priest. I really fought against being office of elder. I mean, I fought about both of them, but whatever. But part of the reason why was because I felt like I was a priest. You know, I mean, I embraced that role, and I now realize that I still can and be an elder.
Yeah.
So there's more than one priesthood office in our soul, is what I'm trying to say.
When Maurice Draper retired from the presidency, he served in his home congregation as a deacon.
Is what?
A deacon, because they needed more deacons.
There you go.
Now, as our churches shrink,
Mhm.
because
We need more
people no longer are coming or just, you know, they're dying out, then they have to take on more responsibilities. There are small congregations. They don't have a choice.
Yes.
You know, we had a funny thing happen at one of our office Christmas parties. I don't know how the people got into religion, but they were talking religion. And somebody came up to John and said, John, what church do you go to? And he says, Community of Christ. And some woman spoke up over here and she said, oh, that's a church where everybody thinks they're a preacher. Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
It is true. Yeah.
Right on. He just looked at her like, yeah, right.
That can be a little bit of a problem, I have to say.
Yeah.
Oh,
She
and
nailed
in
it.
Mormonism, the call to priesthood for males is automatic based on age. Up to the
Eagle Scout to deacon.
16?
For deacons when they're 16 and then,
14, I think, deacons, and 18 priests maybe, or something.
And
I don't
that's when
remember
they go on their
exactly what
missions,
that
yeah.
progression is, but, I mean, so they go under their, not appointment, they don't call it appointment, but when they go on their
Mission.
mission at 19, right? So they have to be elders by that
Yeah,
time.
it's
So
14. I thought it was
14,
16,
16,
18.
18, yeah. That's right.
Yeah, if I remember right.
Well,
But
does,
they continue going on missions as they get older,
They
too.
can, yeah.
yeah.
I like the way the Catholics did it. You know, you had a big family, had like 10 or 12 kids, and then the oldest son had to be a priest, and the oldest daughter had to be a nun, and then the rest of them could be whatever else they wanted to be.
well, you wouldn't want to be the oldest, so you don't have a
You
choice.
don't have a choice.
I don't think that's very fair to the oldest.
Actually, yeah, I know some Catholics who, if
Yeah.
the family had big family, and at least hopefully one of them would do. One
Yeah.
of the boys would go.
Alex has said that to him, that his mother wanted one of their kids to be a priest. That's like this wonderful thing for mom to have one of their kids be a priest. So,
Yeah.
all right. Poor
Well,
kid.
another question for you. Does the author see a difference between ministry and priesthood?
Well, I don't know. I don't remember what Tony said about it, but I'm thinking of like a Venn diagram here where you've got this big circle that's ministry, and within that is a small circle of priesthood. That, I don't know, it's just my example.
I'm thinking this statement, all are called according to the gifts unto them. That statement just rings my mind over. And that doesn't have anything to do about an elder or a priest or anything else. All are called.
Well, and that word authority that Ron used, that's what has been kind of emphasized to me. It's like, I said yes to being an elder because Jerry Rushfeldt said to me, Jane, you're already acting in a lot of those roles, but with the priesthood office, you have authority to act in those roles, and people will see that. And I'm like, that kind of just changed my viewpoint of what priesthood was, because it is not only what we do, but it's how people see us. You know, so it's like, all right, I'll do it.
I'm going to come back to this last question later if we have time, because I'd be curious to know how different people in the priesthood experience the priesthood call. But I'm going to have you just think about if you want to share that or not, and go on to Ephesians. And this is one of the quotes that Tony does in this chapter, but I've gone to the Living Bible. I couldn't figure out what version of the Bible he was using. So I I went to the Living Bible, and it says, some of us have been given special ability as apostles. To others, he has given the gift of being able to preach well. Some have special in winning people to Christ, helping them to trust him as their Savior. Still others have a gift for caring for God's people as shepherds, as a shepherd does his sheep, leading and teaching them in the ways of God. So that kind of encompasses his view of ministry, not priesthood, but ministry, that people are called and given the gift in a variety of different areas that are all needed in the work of Christ.
I thought that was an interesting scripture because it almost sounds like if you're called to one area, that is exclusive of the other. So if you're an apostle, does that mean you don't preach well?
I don't think so.
We'll leave that to the congregation to determine that. What's
Well,
referred to
maybe
as
that's
the great
because the
congregation.
apostles end up doing a lot of the paperwork.
Yeah.
Well, they're supposed to be witnesses of Christ, so they should, in theory, they should be good preachers, but
Supposed to be missionaries, aren't they?
There's another scripture he starts the chapter with, and it talks about a dispute also arose among them as to which of them was considered to be the greatest. Jesus said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you shall be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. For who is greater than the one who is at the table? Or who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? It is not the one who is it not the one who is at the table? And it's kind of a rhetorical question. And he comes back and says, Christ says, but I am among you as one who serves. So ministry is service.
Christ was our example
Yeah,
of
exactly.
a minister.
And it's also interesting that this particular scripture basically says there shouldn't be a hierarchy. There shouldn't be the greatest among you and the least among you. That those who serve are on an equal plane, all giving according to their gifts.
well, in the essence of servant ministry is humility. And,
Yeah.
you know, if you are more worried about am I the best one, then you're not meeting the criteria for servant ministry.
Right. Okay, so do you agree or disagree? And these are quotes from the chapter. In Community of Christ, every member is called, but by the grace of let me try that again. In Community of Christ, every member is called by the grace of baptism and confirmation into ministry. Ministry is about living in imitation of Jesus' self-offering, empowered by the Spirit. Agree? What does that mean to you? What's it saying to you?
Servant ministry. This is exactly like what Jesus said.
Okay.
Means you shouldn't just sit in the pew, you should get busy.
Okay. Is that a problem for our church?
Absolutely.
That
Well,
people can't come and just sit in the pew and not serve?
I was gonna say,
That's why a lot of people don't come
I
to
know.
this church.
It is these days, isn't
I
it?
can name some.
I know.
I
They
think
do
we've
make
scared
it
a lot of
harder.
people off over the years with that.
Yeah.
You know, trying to, you know, get them pressed into service because it's how we see the church functioning. And
Yeah.
maybe because of their background, they're not comfortable with that. So, like I always said there.
Yeah.
Not here very long.
We say to Ryan and April, welcome, what do you want to do? Didn't we?
And put them on every Sunday.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, are we doing?
Back off. How are we doing, Ryan?
Yeah, are we asking you to do too much? That's the,
You're the call now, get busy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Here's my example.
Yeah.
I walked into the Wheeling, West Virginia congregation back in 1977, and there was supposed to be a World Church appointee preach that morning, and he didn't show up.
Oh, no.
And so they said to me, "How'd you like to preach today?"
Oh, my
And that was
gosh.
the first time I'd set foot in that door.
Mm.
Oh.
And so I said, give me 5 minutes.
Wow.
So I walked down and kind of the wooded area just off for a little bit and said, oh yeah, I can say something.
Wow,
So
that's
that's
impressive.
the extreme.
That is extreme.
So-
That happened to my father when we moved to Leavenworth in 1970. The first Sunday we went to church, he became the next pastor.
Oh, wow.
Well, I didn't become the next pastor until a year later. So, to enter Christian community is to accept the divine call to serve with others in faith, hope, and love. The Christian life is not about individual spiritual achievement.
Agreed.
And I should have underlined that the Christian life is not about individual spiritual achievement. How do you feel about that?
I think the individual spiritual achievement will take care of itself.
Okay.
That's an automatic.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it is, though, about individual spiritual development, and I think we have to accept some responsibility for that. Achievement is, like, are we going to be one of the top 3 people at the Olympics on the stands at the end of all of it? But all of the athletes are developed. They all work hard to get where they're at. And that's kind of the calling we have, is to develop their spiritual lives.
Especially, if we're all going to be preachers, we're all going to get up and talk, then the education part of it is something that our church has kind of lacked in the past, which I think we're starting to emphasize more now. There is something to these churches who have PhD, scholars as their preachers. They speak differently than those of us who have kind of that lay ministry thing. And I, for one, find that kind of a challenge for me. It's like, okay, can't go back to school. I could, but I don't want to.
It's kind of like the saying, better remain, and if you're ignorant, to remain silent than to speak and you move on out.
To move on down, exactly. And that sometimes
Are these
happens.
two things closely related, though? I'm not so sure they are. There's some relation, obviously, but I'm not sure how close they are. And be individually spiritual and not do much, or you could do a lot and not have much spiritual life.
Well, and how many people do we know? I know a lot, where I am, that flock to Church of the Resurrection because of Adam Hamilton, not because of Jesus.
Yeah.
If that's what you hear.
Yeah.
It's what a wonderful minister he is, what a preacher.
Is Tony trying in some sense to say to us, the goal is not to reach heaven through our individual achievement. The goal is to build the Zionic community?
Sure.
That's how I interpret that quote. And I do agree. I think let's be honest, there are people who have very little faith in Christianity but do great works. And there are people who have great faith in Christianity and do very little works. And I think we're called to do both, which is probably why when you step in the door, you get an assignment. So
It's a little bit like the difference between faith and works.
yeah.
Well, and then you have a charismatic person that can draw a lot of people, but they may not always be drawing them for the correct reason.
Right.
Well, it makes me think the greatest commandment is this: love your neighbor as yourself. And so we are called to serve first and to love one another.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of the LDS. In my experience, everybody's like, perfect yourself, be totally pure, go straight to the celestial kingdom. Heavens above all heavens, heavens alike. Okay, what?
Yeah, I couldn't hear you, Bernice.
Oh, makes me think about the time when I was going to the LDS. It was all about going straight to the celestial kingdom. And think about that verse, be perfected, and not really thinking about the community. And it's always just, even in their lessons, like the Melchizedek when they're out doing
Mhm.
missionary work. Do anything you can to make yourself worthy so you can go straight to heaven. But
Yeah, it's an emphasis on perfection. Be perfect,
Yeah.
even as your Father in heaven is perfect.
and we can be that way too. I think we are.
That scripture is always perfect.
Yeah, yeah, me too. Because I'm far less perfect.
I know. Such a burden.
Yeah. Well, and I do think the striving for perfection can be a burden, which cuts us off from the real need to be members of the community who accept the divine call to serve with others in faith, hope, and love. But that's my personal bias.
So a charismatic preacher can also have the humility of Jesus.
Right.
But unfortunately, a lot of charismatics lack that power, you
Right.
know, because that's the danger.
That's where
being
the cults
charismatic.
come from.
Yeah.
If they can walk the line.
Well, I think we have to think about the question too of what is it to live a perfect life? Well, no two of us anywhere on the earth live exactly the same experiences. It's all different.
Yeah.
And so maybe the question is about how can I live the best life that I can, where I'm at.
Well, I think once your preacher or minister of choice starts to sound like the devil tempting Jesus in the wilderness, then you have to reassess where you're headed, because, you know, if they're promising, I'm going to give you more power, I'm going to give you more riches, I'm going to, what else did he tempt with? Food, well-being. It's like we all have physical needs, but what is the gospel message? Is it about just succeeding materially? You know, so I don't know.
Well, for every person who humbles themselves and becomes a servant minister, there's going to be somebody somewhere who's going to abuse that, take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And it happens in religion too, unfortunately.
Well, I think it's obvious that both are somewhat important. And there's no reason that you can't be both, really.
Both being, tell me what your
Faith
both
and
are.
works,
Faith and works. Okay.
essentially.
Okay. Well, the author also says the call to ministry comes from Christ to all Christians through their baptism. So that's kind of repeating what we've already talked about, that it's the charge and the challenge for all Christians, all those who are baptized, to perform works of ministry.
I
I
think
want
it's
to add one more little thing, is that apparently there's some people that don't like to be called into doing stuff right away and doing a lot of stuff. That's the thing that appeals to me.
You know, that's one of the biggest reasons why I'm never successful back on the Navajo Res, because they are the most highest judgmental, or at least in my culture, Christian or Navajo. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and whatever baptism, you know, it's just really complicated. I just get so miserable about, okay, I'm going back. But I have total faith. I just kind of lost it along the way. But when I go home, I just smile, and I do get a lot of people mock me. It's like, why did you get baptized? You didn't have to do that when you're, they taught Navajo against you, and they're right, really, But I just like, geez, it gets really complicated. But in a way, they're doing ministry and they're doing work, because but I don't really know the religious part, so I try to combine it sometimes. And like, okay, we have priesthood, we have ministry, we all believe in Christ and God, we all pray to the same person. Every Native American that I know prays to the same God, unless they have several gods like the Egyptians. I don't know. I just thought I'd bring that.
Okay. Well, the author goes on to say ministry takes its bearing from the Christ-appointed tasks of the church. So what are the Christ-appointed tasks of the church? Do you want a hint?
Loving, sharing, and caring.
Helping, sharing, caring. Is that what you said? Okay.
Sisterhood, brotherhood, maybe.
Mhm. Well, the author says the church is called to be messenger. What does that mean? What does it
Very
mean?
good news.
Okay.
Well,
And
the
what's the good
original
news?
commandment was to go into all the world and
By
share the
Peter.
gospel.
Yeah,
By Jesus,
right.
leading his disciples.
A Great Commission.
Great commission.
And what is the Great Commission?
Make disciples of all.
God is
Okay.
love.
And what does that mean?
The messenger.
Loving, caring, and sharing.
Well played.
The circular logic going on here.
Problem solved.
It still backs down to loving, caring, and sharing.
I mean, that really is the Great Commission. The Great Commission is that we love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. You went to others as
I
they
always like this saying, but I always forget who said it. It's like, I think maybe it was St. Francis. Share the gospel wherever you go, and if necessary, use words.
Yeah.
Who said that?
I think it was St. Francis of Assisi.
Right, it was.
Yeah.
Was it?
I like that.
It's attributed to him. I don't know if he actually
that's
said
true. I probably don't.
Yes, I would love to do
It's on
that,
the
and I
wall.
wish I could
know,
do
it's
that.
Written on the walls.
My take on that
Every time I go
Must
home,
be true.
it's like I'm walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, one-
what you do speaks so loudly that I can't hear what you say.
Yes.
Yeah,
Same.
It's the
that's true.
same
Same
context.
gist. Yeah.
That's I think of my thinking.
Well, the author also says the church is called to be servant. Probably doesn't need any explanation there.
I think the current Pope has really exemplified that when it's the foot washing ceremony before Easter and what he's done the last few years. Instead of, in the past they would bring in everyday people, which, had some symbolism, but since he's been doing it, he's brought in prisoners, he's brought in Muslims, people with other faiths, and had washed their feet to express it's not just the good people out in society, but God loves everybody, regardless of their background.
Exactly. Tony says the church is called to be sanctuary. Now, what does that mean?
Hey, we're singing about that today.
Make me a
Sanctuary
sanctuary?
Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary.
is a safe place
Okay.
and
It's a place of protection, whatever
Okay.
the needs are.
A safe place, a place of protection.
So, yeah, holy, sacred.
A holy place, a sacred place. Okay.
And I like it to be called the people are sanctuary. We need to be sanctuaries for people.
Okay.
So someone feels safe to come to us.
The church is the people.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then, there's another one. Church is called to be advocate. What does that mean?
Justice. Stand up for
Peace
justice.
and justice.
Does that mean we get involved in the political process?
afraid so.
Yeah.
In the fight.
Political process?
Well, individually, we can, absolutely. But as a church, I think the church has to walk that fine line and say there are causes that we can join. but
This is
not
where I
parties.
bristle. That last one. And it's inevitable because Jesus was political in the sense that he said no to the worldly authority and said, I'm about the kingdom of my Father. But I bristle with when the world church puts out a statement. I'm like, okay, if this is a democratic talking point, good on you, but I'm not going to adopt it. Because I've got my own beliefs. I don't know where I fall. I guess I'm more libertarian in some, but it's like, what do I have to toe this line? What if I don't believe in X, Y, and Z? And maybe it's a challenge for me to reassess what I believe, but I like I said, I bristle when it gets to.
Well, you can be an advocate for peace and justice. Doesn't mean you have to be an advocate for a party. You know, if we prayed to God and said, God, which party should I join? He'd probably say, join none of them. Who knows? No.
Could be. Could be.
It's interesting when my wife was growing up in Detroit, in the suburb of Detroit. She went to the Shrine of the Little Flower, and Father Coughlin was the minister there, and he would get up every Sunday until prior to elections, and tell the congregation how to vote. Now, what do you think about that? Is that an extreme of what Ryan's talking about?
That's really illegal, immoral, and fattening.
The last one was fattening, you said?
It just goes with the territory.
Well, I think that's where the separation needs to be. I mean, I think, you know,
They just lost their tax exempt.
For peace and justice for others, and not have to go out and preach, you know, your political views. Try to keep that out of the conversation. I think most instances.
Churches aren't supposed to do
So
that.
churches in Kansas are allowed to comment on issues, but not political individuals, you know, the people running. So occasionally you'll see that on churches. They'll have signs out in front and things like that, and you're like, what? But they can't post anything for a particular individual.
But some of them do.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise,
And again, as Dorothy said, that's where you can lose your tax status.
They never
Because
do
you're
that.
not supposed to make political.
We have a couple that live down the street from us that go to the Church of the Resurrection. They bring signs home from church that say things like "Love one another,"
Be kind.
"Be kind," "Be peaceful." You know, nothing
I like those
political
signs.
or
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that
Anything.
political, right?
Yeah, but they post them out.
We
They're-
put them out just
You'll
everybody
see them.
else.
You'll see them
I've
around.
seen them. That's what you call a
For
church
so-and-so,
club.
and theirs says "Love one another." It's kind of-
Right next to them. That's really good.
Don't you think that we can advocate for everyone being treated humanely and fairly without taking a political stance on immigration or on abortion or any of the other big hot ticket items? Can we do that?
That's tricky.
No, I'm talking about individually.
That's tricky. Is a fetus a human being? I don't want. We don't have to discuss it, but I'm just saying that's a can of worms.
Yeah.
individually, you need to come to your own conclusion. And as a church, we're not saying one way or the other.
Well, what if somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, you know, Ryan, I know you're an elder in the church. What does your church believe about this, or what do you believe about this?" And you know, or if they're seeking advice. I haven't been confronted with that issue, but it's, you know.
I think the more likelihood is you would have somebody come to you and say, I'm having a problem and I need help. And then we respond, what is your need, and let's see what we can do to help you.
Well,
As a minister, it's not having a political discussion.
like Norman Brownhour used to say, at this day and age, we're moving forward, and whatever happened in the past is the past. I like it in this day and age, or something around that line, that the church is always changing.
Well, and I think it's fair, Ryan, if someone asks you that, for you to say, our church allows individuals to have their own individual opinions, and here is mine. I think that's fair. You know, because that to me is the greatest gift that the World Church has given us, is to say each of us can have our own opinions and we're not going to always agree. It's okay. So we get to discuss it with each other.
It is a tricky issue, and I'll make it very, very specific.
I remember something that happened a few years ago. Being on Wise, I brought up some political thing that was going on. And John Snyder looked right at me and he said, "Hey, Jim, we do not discuss politics here at the coffee round table. It's too divisive." And
We don't?
I don't discuss politics with my sister because she's on the left wing and I'm on the right wing, and get along great with her as long as we don't talk politics. But John Snyder taught me a lesson about bringing politics into the church because it's divisive. So I don't do it.
Well, I guess the main thing I'm trying to get across is it's an issue we need to talk about. We need to think about, as an elder in the church, when I post on Facebook and I advocate for certain issues, does that represent the church or does it represent me? Is it a problem if I advocate for whatever, open borders or whatever it may be? Or I'm pro or anti-abortion. Is that an issue? It's not something we're going to resolve today, but there's a difference between representing the church and having a personal opinion. And I think I still go back to the earlier quote where we are charged to be agents of hope and peace and love, and do that in a generous manner. And hopefully I do that. Hopefully we all do that.
There are important decisions to be made sometimes, and sometimes it has to be done politically because that's the system that we're born into and have to live with, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah.
You talk about immigration, and everybody has an opinion, and it would be great if people could get together and come to some conclusions that would be reasonable. But in the meantime, I read about a town, I think in South Texas on the border with Mexico. And when immigrants, when illegal immigrants come across the river, they're hungry, they're thirsty, they're sunburned, they got all this stuff going on. And the people of the town, or at least some of the people in town, take water on and food out to them. Now, that's meeting the need of the moment. It doesn't solve the bigger problem, which is we've got to figure this out sometime if we ever can. But they're at least in a very, I think, Christ-like way, responding to a need that other human beings have. And, that's pretty raw. That's kind of like, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Okay, you can't walk up to somebody and say, well, I'm a Democrat or a Republican, therefore you need to either go this way or that way. You bring them a glass of water, you bring them a sandwich and say, let me see if I can find a place for you to stay until we get this figured out.
Well, and
You put yourself in their place. What would I want if it was me coming across that desperate?
we also need to remember the story of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan didn't ask whether the man was from Israel or Samaria.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't ask what his political beliefs were. Didn't ask if he were Jewish or non-Jewish. He simply served him, helped him. So.
And there was a reason why Jesus told the story that it was the Samaritan that helped, because it was the priest and it was the people, others, the people in his group would expect to help that person on the side of the road, didn't help. So Jesus is saying, it doesn't matter, just help.
Well, and the one story where the man gave a cup of cold water to the prisoner who was being dragged down the road. I mean, Jesus was the story. That one was that's see it happening.
I think a lot of this goes back to the old WWJD bracelets that people used to wear a lot.
Yeah.
We
What
tend,
would Jesus do?
excuse me, we tend to think that, the people flooding our borders is just an American problem. But if you listen to the news, it's happening all over the world. Every country just about has people flooding their borders because they're desperate. Their country isn't getting enough rain to feed the people. And the political situation here is bad, so they have to go someplace where they can live. So, we tend to think that it's an American problem, but it isn't. Turkey is having a problem because people are coming to Turkey in large numbers by boat, trying to flee other countries. So, it's everywhere.
I've
There's
seen a lot of
just
them
too
on the
many people.
reservations. Those Pakistanians or Siberians or those people, they're beginning to come in, like literally taking over stores or motels or whatnot. Well, anyway, I wouldn't.
Well, we are rapidly running out of time, but I think this is an important quote, the author borrows an image from St. Augustine, stating that priesthood must be the servant of the servants of God. They are not the ministers, since that task belongs to the whole community. And
There you go.
I think
St.
that
Augustine
that
said
kind of
that.
makes a lot of sense in light of what we've been talking today.
First time I've seen that quote or that statement.
And it goes on to talk about, in our tradition, it lists priesthood offices that we have. And again, an interesting comment is that these roles do not necessarily appear, all of them, in the New Testament. Some do and some don't. It says priesthood is not a higher calling than that of disciple, but an invitation to embody authentically specific facets of Jesus' mission. And again, it goes back to his mission being that of love and joy and hope and peace, and furthering those concepts. I was going to go through and make sure you knew about some of the language that appears in our. I don't know if this is the most recent priesthood manual or not. 2004.
I think it is. Yeah.
I think it is.
I think it is.
Yeah, we've always thought it was
Yeah.
more recent, but it isn't.
Yeah. So
Time goes fast.
deacon is referred to as a model of Jesus as the comforter. The teacher is the model of Jesus as the peacemaker. The priest is the model of Jesus as a friend. Elder is the ministers of mission. And the high priest is ministers of vision. And then, of course, this is a specialized high priest, the evangelist. They're ministers of parental and counsel and advice. I thought that was kind of interesting, but that's the language. That's the language out of the priesthood manual. So I thought I'd share that with you.
That's cool.
And of course, we have other offices, leadership, church-wide offices such as president, apostle, bishop, 70, and evangelist. So we're out of time. So I'm going to just rush through this and just let you know that the message from the one is, I am among you as one who serves. And if we're to live a Christ-like life, that's our charge. And if time allows, which it doesn't, I'm just going to have a few more questions for you. And next week, we're talking about the living hope facing the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.